Okay, so we're going to read Structuration Theory from Sociology, and here we go. Thank you, Shane. Sociological paradigm of social structure. Okay. Structuration theory, a concept in sociology that offers perspective on human behavior based on a synthesis of structure and agency effects known as the duality of structure. Instead of describing the capacity of human action as being constrained by powerful, stable social structures, such as education, religion, or political institutions, or as a function of the individual expression of will, that is, agency, structuration theory acknowledges the interaction of meaning, standards, and values, and power, and posits a dynamic relation between these different facets of society. Yeah, well, I mean, how people organize themselves is a philosophical question. Of course, it's the main question of sociology and what they're doing, like how people organize themselves socially. But like again, how that has philosophical ramifications, of course, too. So, I mean, you've got like a game theory, like game theory, social stuff like that. How can I be happy alone, and be surrounded by people? Sapir Whorf, but for values, basically. Well, we'll find out. I don't know, but like that's a good question. Okay, theories of structure and agency. The nexus of structure and agency has been a central tenet in the field of sociology since its inception. Theories that argue for the preeminence of structure, also called the objectivist view in this context, resolve that the behavior of individuals is largely determined by their socialization into that structure, such as conforming to a society's expectations with the respect to gender or social bias or social class. Structures operate at varying levels, with the research lens focused at the level appropriate to the question at hand. At its highest level, society can be thought to consist of mass socioeconomic stratifications, such as through distinct social classes. On a mid-range scale, institutions and social networks, such as religious or familial structures, might form the focus of study, and at the micro scale, one might consider how community or professional norms constrain agency. Structuralists describe the effects of structure in constraining ways. French social scientist Émile Durkheim highlighted the positive role of stability and permanence, whereas philosopher Karl Marx described structure as protecting the few, doing little to meet the needs of many. In contrast, proponents of agency theory, also called the subjective view in this context, consider that individuals possess the ability to exercise their own free will and make their own choices. Here, social structures are viewed as products of individual action that are sustained or discarded rather than as incommensurable forces. I mean, look, if you're going to be talking about the structure, either it's doing two things. It's going to be controlling you, or you're going to be not controlling you, basically. And so this is the thing. If you got agency, then you get to do things out of free will. Otherwise, you are going to be like born into like a world that is constraining the way you are going. So this is kind of just how do we deal with these abstract entities that we think we deal with. But okay. Yes, and here's where the structuralism comes in. Giddens theory. Sociologists have questioned the polarized nature of the structure-agency debate, highlighting the synthesis of these two influences on human behavior. A prominent scholar in this respect is British sociologist Anthony Giddens, who developed the concept of structuration. Giddens argues that just as an individual's autonomy is influenced by structure, structures are maintained and adapted through the exercise of agency. The interface at which an actor meets a structure is termed structuration. Okay, so now we've got embedded interactive systems. So, I guess this is going to be like an interactionist sort of thing. Fine. Thus, structuration theory attempts to understand human social behavior by resolving the competing views of structure agency and macro-micro perspectives. This is achieved by studying the process that takes place at the interface. Alright, so we've got a process theory is what's going on here. At the interface between the actor and the structure. Structuration theory takes the position that social action cannot be fully explained by the structure or agency theory alone. Instead, it recognizes that actors operate within the context of rules produced by social structures, and only by acting in a compliant manner are these structures reinforced. All right, so this is what we were talking about before. What do people do when they are dealing with the structure? And we were talking about this in the context of online systems, but what happens is when you constrain online systems, you are compliant with the system or you fight against it, and you find ways to say different things against it. And so what is the process that's going on here? That's what this structuration is probably going to be asking about. Viper says, it reminds me of that famous Chomsky's quote, "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum, even encourage the more critical and dissent views." Yeah, you have to give people the illusion of choice, the illusion of opinion, and you can see that in propaganda all the time nowadays too, is that within the acceptable range, dissent is fine, but you have to keep that range sort of like under control. But like this one here is going to say that the process of the people interacting with the system is what is fundamental though. Okay. As a result, social structures have no inherent stability outside action because they are socially constructed. It's the interaction people have with the structures. Alternatively, through the exercise of reflexivity, agents modify social structures by acting outside the constraints the structures place on them. Giddens' framework of structure differs from that in the classic theory. He proposes three kinds of structure in the social system. The first is signification, where meaning is coded in the practice of language and discourse. The second is legitimation, consisting of the normative perspectives embedded in societal norms and values. Giddens' final structural element is domination, concerned with how power is applied, particularly in the control of resources. Okay, so this is interesting, this last bit. How do you actually interact with things? The signification is the process, the way you define the process here. So if you need to, because if you're going to be in a system, you have to understand what counts as being in the system. You need to understand the process as something that is sensible within the system. So that's the signification. You're defining the terms of what is the structure and how we interact with it. Then the legitimation is the actual practice of doing it. That's the normative perspective. That you can act within the system in a certain way. And you can look at this in any sort of political or social thing. What are the normal rules of engagement in war, in politics, in your social group? Whatever that is. But you guys know, whoever you are friends with, people that you're friends with, that you deal with, there is a certain sort of interactions you have. That's the signification. And then the normative thing is what is allowed and what is not allowed. And then this final one is the domination, is who has power and kind of gets to set what counts as normative. There's domination, legitimation. Oh yeah, Valpo, what do you think it's called? The mutual a mutual legitimation is is there checks and balances in the US government, or is there mutual legitimation of everyone else's bullshit? Yeah, I mean, this is a process theory. So yeah, Giddens would say that all three can happen at the same time in any structure. Yes, and I suspect this is happening in most times more than one at once, because the signification is only the definition of the terms. That's all that's happening. You're defining what counts as being interacting with that system. And then you are going to be dealing with, moreover, the normative things, the things that you should be doing. And then the way those normatives get set up is the way that power is applied. Yeah. So Aristotle's, that's right, Valpo. It's like the causes, but it's applied within social structures here, it looks like. Weber has a whole for instance, there's a whole theory about types of learning that legitimate power in society. Yeah, this is, again, this is stuff that's beyond me. I don't do the sociology, I don't do political philosophy, and I'm not good at literature either, but I do understand the Aristotle's causes. So this is why I can rattle this crap off, is because look, if you're in a structure, you have to be able to define your terms, what counts, then what you have to be able to say what matters, what is normative, what should you be doing, what is the thing that is allowed and not allowed, and then how does that also get affected is by how power is applied. Either that's socially, what you should be doing, don't murder people, or by what sort of speech is allowed, by if you're on a platform, what does Google or Twitter allow you to say, what does the government allow you to say, say, and that's a different thing about what is like socially allowable, politically allowable, things like that. And so vocation, oh, that's in response. But yeah, so the question is this better, a better analysis than the other ones, the more fixed, that you're fighting against the system or the system is controlling you? This is much more interactive. This is a process. Now, here's the thing. You can be concerned with how power is applied and the control of resources in any of these systems. That's fine. That's not anything special. The legitimation is consisting of the normative perspectives embedded as social norms and values. That is also going to be gonna show up anywhere. How does an institution legitimize itself? What the real work is all going to be the signification thing here. Let me catch what Shane said about this. Gibbs is one of my favorite theorists. If you sum up his argument, he basically says that the structures in place have inertia to keep themselves in place, but at any time society can change the structure if there are enough individuals that decide to change their mind. Yes. That's going to be the case. Like, if there's going to be a build-up and like at a certain point there's going to be like a critical like tipping point, and that's how things change, because there's going to be a problem at a certain point and it's going to go unsolved by the institution. And it says, but there are several ways of understanding power, like social exchange theory sees power in terms of transactional relationships. Yeah, there's going to be more than one way to do this. Viper says, I wonder how much is emergent behavior fueled by utility, or that's what enables control. I think that's what enables control. It's you're going to, once you gain power in a system, you have to know how it works. But like, that's going to be an emergent behavior in that system. But like, that's the nature of what a system is that it has a stratification of power and not. Yeah, the limits of my language means the limits of my power. So this is what I mean. The first is signification, and that's what's going to be critical here, is that this is where you're not going to be able to understand things. Like, at a certain point in a system, you're not going to be able to explain what's going on. It's going to start breaking down, and that's where the process breaks down, because you're not going to be able to do the legitimation anymore when you don't know why you're like getting bad things happening to you or good things happening to you. Once you can't understand what the legitimation is, then the people in power are going to fail to be able to control you, because they're the normative acts, the things that the powerful want you to say you should be doing, don't make sense to you anymore. And so this is where the work is going to be done. What is the discourse that's going on in the system? And this is a back and forth thing. So this is what's really, to me, if you're asking me what's new here, is the signification, the explanation of how the people explain things to themselves in the system, as opposed to the other theories where you just have free will, where you get to do whatever. That doesn't really explain how you learn, where you decide what makes sense and what doesn't, or the structure which is told to you what makes sense and what doesn't. Yeah, well, we could technically change the SCOTUS, but like, it'd be extremely difficult nowadays. I mean, yeah, once you start realizing we've got these people that have almost no understanding, like, you know, the generational divide, it's just very, very obviously huge at the moment, and it's not good. And this is the thing. The things that the people in power in our government are talking about make no sense to like the young people. And like, it's like painfully obvious when, like, you know, they had the tech companies come up and talk, and the people asking questions had no idea what they were talking about. And that goes to the legitimation here, because it makes them look like fools. What's the theme? Well, I'm reading this paper on Structuration Theory is a different way of discussing sociology at the moment. So, Shane says, and welcome in, Zardis. Shane says, yeah, we can change anything. The issue is that the longer the structure stays in power, the more inertia it has, and the more people accept the dominant power of that structure. Yes, but again, when does revolution well, not that revolution happens, but when is there a tipping point? Because at some point these things break down. I mean, wasn't there a revolution like today in some country where the president had to flee? And said that'd be ideal, but the actual change will not depend on the will of the people if the government doesn't want to do anything. And it seems there will be even more far-right people joining in. Some institutions are designed to have a life of their own. Yeah, like these things can yeah, Sri Lanka. Thank you, Shane. I knew you'd know. The thing is, it's like, this is a big country, and like you can, like, you know, part of the country will support you, part of it won't, and you're always gonna have like a certain amount that, like, if you can like shift around well enough, you can still sort of like gain enough political power and inertia to keep going. I don't know what will take it to yeah, I don't know what it'll take to like make change in America, or if it, like it's even going to happen in any time soon. But you know, Shane's the person to ask about that more than me. I've never been in the midst of a revolution. I'm in New York. We're pretty stable in New York. Viper said governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly towards aristocratic forms. No government in history has been known to evade this pattern. And the aristocracy develops, government tends more and more to act exclusively in the interest of the ruling class, whether that class be hereditary, royalty, oligarchs, or financial empires, or entrenched bureaucracy. Yeah, see, this is the thing. The people in power want to stay in power. They really do. And so they're going to do stuff that eventually just benefits themselves. This is sort of, it's nothing special. It's just people don't want to give up what they got. So the question is, when the people in power become so disconnected from the people on the ground, that's when again, the signification, what is meaning is coded in the practice of language and discourse. The language and discourse is going to separate between the people in power and the people on the ground. And you're going to get this stratification of society where you've got certain people who know certain things and other people who know different things, and they don't talk to each other. And this is the problem. And so how do we bring these two groups together, or can we? I don't know. And so I guess that what's interesting about this structuration theory is that you get to talk about that here, because we were talking about Simone Weil a few weeks ago, and she wanted, like, that sort of area wants revolution, but I think they were saying revolution never really happens. And I think that's because under these theories here, where you just have agency, you have free will, you never get to like really overthrow anything. It's just like sort of people doing what they want. And then the structure, on the other hand, it never really gets revolutionized because it can't go anywhere. Like, the structure is sort of that. Determinism? Oh, hi, X Barry Lung. Yeah, Barry Long. We're not real. Well, you can talk about sociological determinism at this point, but we were talking about not that theory. But like in this case, the old theory where like you're basically born into a social class or gender or whatever, that would be a social determinant. I can't speak. Determinism. But like this is trying to, you know, get away from that by allowing people to like do some sort of interaction with the system. Yeah, the whole thing can be torn down. It would just be hard to do. Well, that seems more accurate, because it seems like down here is that this legitimation here has this interaction with the signification. And that's really what's going to happen. It's going to lose legitimation when the people on the ground no longer signify, or they no longer explain things in the way that the people in power do. And then at that point there's a disconnect, and there won't be the people who the mass of people will no longer see the ruling class as legitimate. And of course, then what do the people in power do to keep it? Usually they're going to do worse and worse things, because they're going to run out of power eventually. Barry says you can do what you want, but you cannot what you want to want. Infinite regress? What controls what? Well, look, that's the question. If you've got some sort of decision-making ability, Barry, then you're going to have to take in what exists. That's what the theory says here. There's a signification. You're going to get in what counts as meaningful in your world from the practice of language and discourse. So you're going to interact with like social structures, institutions, and things like that. But this theory says, look, it's legitimating itself, but like you don't have to listen to that legitimation. You can signify things differently. You can code things differently than the institution wants. And so the question is, how does the people in power fight back to get you to keep treating them as legitimate? But you don't have to do it, because the signification does have some sense that you get to do something on your own. So that's what this theory is saying. So if you just said like your position is defined and determined by the structure, then yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. But this is a different theory. This isn't a deterministic theory. Shane says an example of that process would be the federal government dictating standards for elementary schools and a student learning how to think. Yeah, so I mean, you definitely get that sort of institutionalization. There are certain levels, like where they have standard testing. You have to know this amount of stuff, and learning that has to basically mean you do certain things. So, yeah, Shane, your other suggestions tend to be my most viewed things on YouTube. Like everyone, the most looked at stuff recently was my analysis of Dune's. What'd we do? Whatever that little thing from Dune you had me read, which was kind of fun. I still haven't learned why to think idiots seem to be way happier. I don't know. Have you ever been an idiot before? Maybe they're not. Maybe they just seem that way. The litany against fear, yeah. So that and the the Star Wars, whatever it was, thing we read, or whatever it was, the other stuff. Those get a lot of clicks, so that's fun. The structure of government would be teaching people about itself, so that when those people grow up, they would perpetuate the structure itself. That's exactly what indoctrination is. Yeah, the gunslinger's code. That's right. Yeah. So that stuff gets a bunch of views. I got someone complaining that like, this doesn't really seem like philosophy to me. I was like, yes, this was a viewer request. You can look at the other 300 videos I have if you need any other proper philosophy. I was like, come on, man. I was like, yeah. So this is the question of institutionalization. Like how institutionalized people are. I mean, of course, you can go watch The Shawshank Redemption and be like, I'm an institutional man. It's like, well, I think you have hope. You can get out of being an institutional man. Question is, I mean, if you're in the Matrix, like as Neo or as Morpheus would say, it says some people are so dependent on the system that they will fight to defend it. And this happens a lot. People will fight to defend the system because they have taken on the legitimation of the rich and powerful, and they think that is what makes them legitimate, and then they don't realize that they're working against their own behalf. And so this is the question. We should read the Christy Dotson What Counts as Philosophy Pee-pee? Sure. I mean, send me a link or something. I don't know these things off the top of my head. But yeah. Let's see. So the question is, as a result, social structures have no inherent stability outside human action because they are socially constructed. I mean, that's kind of unfair. This is not exactly right. Nothing, like, our whole world is our stuff because of human action, because they're socially constructed. I mean, that's basically everything. The question is, what else do they do? They have sort of like goods and services located at certain things. They have other structures too. Like basically all the stuff that like the US military has is on bases behind locked doors. Those aren't socially constructed. Those are real doors. So like those doors are not socially constructed, and so that actually adds something to it. So there is more to it. There is a bit of a there are physical structures in institutions. You're a big fan of Giddens? Well, I mean, it looks good to me. The question is, are these really the only alternatives? And it might be the best of the alternatives. Basically, if you want to go Hegel on it, well, then you've got the two opposites, and then this is the coming together of the two opposites, and therefore you've got like the next theory is like this is the the ablation or whatever the word is. So, because otherwise you're just going to be stuck with either having everything in determinism or everything is free will, which gives no structure. What legitimized the construction of those physical structures? I don't know what legitimized it, but I mean they're there now. That was a social construction that it got done in the first place because it took more than one person to put it together. But I mean, once it's there, then it has it has value in itself. Like, what's the value in a gun outside of someone who knows how to shoot one? Very little, but like it can still do things on its own in some sense. Like, like certain things are going to explode. Like bullets could, like if you put them in a fire, they'll pop. So it's like they still have physical qualities. So you can't rule out the physics of the world, that like there actually does have physical properties. And these things do matter in terms of like how we interact with things. So that's a small point, that like there are more structures to this, but like it's not like super thanks. Shane says, people inside sociology either love him or hate him, but most people in academic sociology are either one or the other. And most today are leaning towards the purely subjective angle. What was that people have free will? That was just like, okay, proponents of agency theory consider that individuals possess the ability to exercise their own free will and make their own choices. Here, social structures are viewed as products of individual action that are sustained, discarded, rather than as incommensurable forces. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, what makes a paperweight? It's, that we have paper that we want to weigh down. So, yeah, this is the question. It's like, yeah, well, social structures are just viewed as products of individual action. Really? That would seem a little hard. I mean, to the institutionalization of people to constantly maintain them means that you'd still need to explain why is everyone acting in a collective way. Basically, everyone gets to pick, and it doesn't matter what other people think about what you pick. Well, yeah, but that's going to be real hard. Like, that's interesting that people are leaning that way, because how do they explain collective action so well then? And why do institutions maintain themselves so well if everyone just gets to pick? Why is everyone picking the same way? Seems like a very strange thing to explain if everyone just is just naturally going that way and there's nothing to explain that. That seems like a very funny sort of coincidence that everyone is picking to maintain the same institutions, and you'd think there'd be some variety, unless like they're also claiming that the current institutions are somehow naturally have like some sort of natural property, that they're fundamental. But that would be stupid. I'm not saying people don't do stupid things. I'm just saying, yeah. Well, that was what the paper we were reading last week. We were saying that when you get into scale, that people start choosing these things because they choose what, like, throwing in with the institution as a question of personal choice gives them more immediate benefit than trying to all, like, buck the trend. That's a fair thing in some sense, but then again, then it's not everyone gets to pick. That would still mean that there is some sort of institution that is maintaining the short-term benefit that scales. Shane says the particular popular paradigm is called Symbolic Interactionism. It basically says that society is an outgrowth of one-on-one or small groups interaction, and that larger systems are just grass-rooted symbols that everyone agrees on. Okay, so basically it's just overblown, like, small groups. I mean, I can see the appeal to that, because small groups are easier to explain, and large institutions are harder to explain. And so if you don't have to explain the large institutions, you can just say it's just some sort of outgrowth of all the small things we can do. But I mean, philosophically, there's complaints about people saying, why are small things more somehow fundamental than big things? Like, you get this in physics. You like the tyranny of the smallness. Society much like orgies. Yes, Vipers. You keep up that line of thought. So, like, why is it that, like, what you're saying is, like, well, the fundamental things are, like, in the small group compared to in the big group. But what makes that really that fundamental? Why should the big group be any different? I don't know. And then they're probably just gonna. You see, what immediately comes to mind, Shane, is that all the things they don't want to explain is they're just gonna call it like emergent of big groups, and we don't know how to do it because, like, it was never on the small group. But that's just dodging the question. That's just, defining it, saying, oh, those things don't matter. And also, thanks for being by. I appreciate it. Hope you're feeling all right and the move goes well. Shane says, well, the symbolic interactionism was a response to the dominant power of Marx and Durkheim, and then the postmoderns got involved. Yeah, see, basically, if you're going to go reactionary against all the structural theory people, the ones that are saying, okay, everything is part of control, that makes sense that everyone's sort of reactionary back down to the small individual and group. But, yeah, I don't know. No more donuts, Vipers? Dinner, much like orgies. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, this is like the sociology of the sociologists. Like, why are they reacting so hard against structure, like the structural theories? Well, it's because the Marx had such a heyday in the Durkheim and all those things. So the question is, what are we really going to get out of these theories, though? Like, what are we going to do about it? The signification, like I said, this is where everything is all the action's going to happen here, where meaning is coded in the practice of language and discourse, and the language and discourse is what people get to change, their language and their discourse. And so this is where it's going to work, and the language and the discourse are going to then affect legitimation of the social structures and the institutions, and then the ones with power are here. You ate too many donuts. Okay. Sure. All right. I mean, Shane, do you have anything else to say? I mean, you know more about this than I do. This is just my take on, like, look at what the people are doing. They were reacting against the Marx and the Durkheims and, like, talking about how we're, like, controlled by all these structures. So they ran to the free will people, but then they're not going to explain how anything gets done because free will is structuralist. You get to do whatever, and you're saying, oh, these little groups are doing it, but that doesn't actually explain anything because you can't explain anything outside of the little group. You think it's empowering? Okay. Well, it looks like it's giving a little bit more of a basis for action. Because, like I said, free will is too free. You can't explain anything at that point. The structure sucks. It's hard to change it, and it doesn't want to go away. But also, you have power to use that, and you can decide on your own level to do something. It's very, very hard to actually understand how to start fighting these systems. I mean, you have to start with thinking about the world differently, because meaning and therefore legitimation and power is coded into the practice of language and discourse. So you really have to work against your own language at that point. Well, most of us feel like we don't have any power at this point. It's extremely difficult because, it just is. It's very hard. But yeah, you have to give them the tools in some sense to do stuff, and where you can, and this is what's good about this. The meaning is coded in the language and discourse, and that's what the legitimation is. So you can talk about changing the language and discourse, as opposed to up here where you have free will and there's nothing to talk about because free will is just a fucking bullshit term and it means nothing, and it's just like either you have it or you don't, and it's just like that's it. So, Vipers, does fixing the system involve putting you in charge? I don't know if I've been farther and farther away from putting the tech people in charge. Like I've just been calling them techno-fascists in my head. Like that's how I view like the current like sort of like the control of like the big tech companies. They're just techno-fascists. They think they are the smarter group of people. They know all the technology, and so they should be in power. And it's like the techno-fascists, they just want to be in power, and eventually it'll just be just the people at the top of the tech company, and it'll be just as bad as every other fascist ever was. Yeah, well, will you share how to fix the system, Vipers? Or is it a secret? Oh, see? Techno-fascism. Distributed automation of human needs. Okay, automation. Who's doing the Who's doing the distribution of the automated goods? Who has all the stuff to distribute then? Who gets to do that? I don't know. But anyway, my voice is dying, so I don't have much else to, much time left. So any other questions? Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you, Shane, for this structuration theory, which is an interesting way of looking at institutions and